Good morning and welcome to the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce, second in a series, Surviving COVID-19. Today we're going to deal with international trade and investment. We have a great panel, but first of all, I wanted to make sure that we wish you the best of health and safety. We hope you are all doing well and sheltering at home and doing all the things to avoid infection. These are trying times, and certainly the disruption in international trade has been quite significant. The Brazilian American Chamber really deals with a lot of commerce and finance, et cetera, and the purpose of the chamber is to improve information, interaction, commerce, finance, investment between Brazil and the United States. And we have an auspicious panel to talk about all of those things today. First, we have Minister Fernando de Oliveira Sena, who's the Deputy Consul General at the Consul General. He's joined by Minister Marco Antonio Nakata, who is the Vice Consul General here in New York for Brazil. We have Laura Rabinowitz, who's with really an expert on international trade with Greenberg Traurig. And then we have Peter Hawkins of Mohawk, who is a close friend and also comes to us from Canada, who does the actual trade. Finally, Lucio Feijó Lopes, the principal managing partner at Feijó Lopes in Brazil, who does a lot on the legal side as well, complementing what Laura does at Greenberg and Traurig. So without further ado, you have a link to their bios. I won't take time right now doing that, but I'm going to turn this over to Minister Fernando Sena, who's going to give a talk and then hand it to Minister Nakata. Fernando?
Thank you, John. And also, it's really, I really want to start by thanking you for you and the Chamber and all the colleagues of the Chamber for organizing this very timely virtual event, online event. I think it's a very, very good thing of the Chamber to continue working, operating. I think it's very welcome. Also say hello to my fellow panelists. I'm sure we're going to have a very fruitful discussion. And since it's the first time I'm addressing the Chamber, let me also say congratulations to the new elected and some re-elected members of the Chamber, and wish the new president and chairperson, Simone Morato, all the best in her activities, and she of course can count on the Brazilian consulate for everything that she needs and everything that the Chamber needs. So basically, I mean, I think the point I wanted to say is that I think I will focus my presentation today on exactly where we are in the Consulate General of Brazil in terms of trade, investment, and tourism, which are the areas that are my portfolio. And I understand my colleague, Minister Marco Antonio Nakata, will speak about consular activities that are very important and one of the Brazil's priority today when it comes to our foreign policy agenda. To talk about what we are doing now in terms of business continuity, let me just bring you back to, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar, but just to focus on what the Consulate General Brazil does in terms of trade, investments, and tourism under the leadership of Ambassador Enio Cordeiro, the Consul General of Brazil. If I could summarize what we do normally, in the normal circumstances, I could divide our work in 4 pillars. The first pillar is trade promotion, and together with many entities like APEX, APEX Brazil, and many organizations in Brazil, class organizations, our work is basically to try to foster, increase, diversify exports of commodities and services from Brazil to the US, mainly to our area of operation, which is New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. These are the three main markets that the Consulate General in New York covers. As you know, our trade agenda is very diversified. We can talk about that later, but we know that we have very different kind of products that we comes from, for instance, from Brazil to New York. It's very diversified, many areas like primary metals, wood products, leather, food manufactured, chemicals, agricultural, paper nuts, which is a very, what we call also in Brazil cellulose and others products. So we have an active agenda in this area, which we can do also through trade fairs and supporting business missions to this area, no? Of our operation. So the first, as I mentioned, is trade promotion. The second pillar is investments. And here what I can tell you is that we have been supporting all the activities from our, especially from the PPI program, you know, the partnership program that is basically a set of very important programs that now the Ministry of Economy and others, that the president decides to give priority to many projects in the area, especially in the area of infrastructure. So we receive a lot of delegations from PPI, you know, from the Secretary of the Program of Investments, the Minister of Infrastructure, Minister of Mines and Energy. I think we try to help them and facilitate that the agenda, the calendar of those auctions in Brazil are known and to the investment community in New York, in order to bring this very needed investments to Brazil to develop infrastructure, ports, airports, railroads, roads. So this is something that we have been doing, that is one of the focus, because precisely because New York is so rich in terms of business and investments community, you know, all the banks, and so this has been a very active part of our normal work. So that was the second pillar. The third pillar, I would say, is the tourism. And here we have been working very close to Embratur to showcase Brazil as excellent tourism destinations. This is something that is not very difficult, because Brazil is so great in so many aspects, in terms of places to visit, amazing places to visit. And in this connection, we have been trying to spread the word that Brazil for Americans, in almost, no, not precisely at this moment, but there was a visa is no longer required to nationals from the US, Japan, Canada, Australia. So we have been talking to many people about this, because I mean, very recently, only 3% of Americans knew about the visa exemption. And we're trying to spread the word and make this known. So we have a lot of seminars, even using Times Square in one of the layouts to show the visa-free program, and also amazing places to visit. The fourth and last pillar, I would say, is entrepreneurship. I think here what we try to do is to help the Brazilians who are already in New York and they want to open up a business or increase their business, develop their business. And we count a lot with solidarity of many that are also members of the chamber and other colleagues that, I mean, they do it for free to make workshops to tell Brazilians who are here to how they can open business, avoid pitfalls, avoid mistakes. So it's very pleasant. We do this not only in New York, but in Philadelphia, Newark, Long Branch, many other places upstate New York, making workshops to tell people. I mean, so we bring in a workshop, people from accounting, from legal systems, and the feedback is always very great. It's always a full house. And also we did 4 last year. No, yeah, 4 last year plus 1 focused on women entrepreneurs, which was dedicated to women together with the city of New York, because this is also a program that we have a lot of connections with the SPS. And I remember last week we had Commissioner Greg. So we work with him also with his team, and also with the federal programs like the SBA, that which is kind of has a connection like our SEBRAE. So they are always in these workshops with us so that the Brazilians know what they can count in the city or in the federal government of the US. So last year, for instance, we had 49 business missions, 30 governmental missions, 258 trade fairs, seminars, and others, and 233 visits and meetings, and 31 market research. That is also something that we do to Brazil. So of course, now with the COVID-19, we are trying to, basically what we're trying to do is to, while protecting the health of our staff, and it's trying to minimize disruptions to trade investments and to global supply chains, and then keep the trade flows and the supply chain operating, and trying to contribute also to some kind of confidence building, restoring confidence. So basically now we are continue doing these pillars, but of course we have been focused more in the emails. That only to have an idea, per year we have something like 400 emails from Brazilians trying to know how to sell things in the US, in this area, in New York, in New Jersey. So we get this like 400 a year, more or less. Last year we had 380. These emails from Brazilians continue are still there now. And we have a team at home, of course, doing a remote, answer them and giving them names of distributors and facilitating. That's what we are trying to, this is a lot of part of our work. We don't engage in the negotiations of prices, but we of course link the suppliers, Brazilian suppliers, with American buyers, putting them together so that they can organize their own bids. So we facilitate that. Embratur, I don't know if you have seen, has already launched videos that we are trying to also to send concerning what to do after the COVID-19. And also, and I think the third thing that also we have been doing is messages on the Brazilian entrepreneurs in New York. As you know, there are a lot of concerns out there concerning how to pay rent and how to pay employees and how to pay distributors. There's also concerns with refunds of products, and so many. So we have sent many emails to people in New York, Philadelphia, New Jersey, trying to explain them how to do and where to go and who to try to contact to get funds, or so we have been doing this. Sorry, John, you want to say something?
No, only when you're finished. Go ahead.
Okay. So, and of course, what is still operating is in Brazil, our portal that is very useful. Is a website, is a portal called investexportbrazil.gov.br, where American buyers or Brazilian suppliers, they can also interact through this portal. So we also make that known to know whenever we have an interaction. So this is what I'm going to stop here, because I think it's important also to maybe have some discussion and and I really want to listen to other colleagues. I just want to say that I think with this COVID-19, I think it's very important that we strengthen our solidarity, our compassion, and look out for the others, for those most vulnerable that are in the difficult situation right now. So whatever we can do to help those who are vulnerable, who don't have hope, so that we can, like through philanthropy or other means, to try to help those that are most in need, and they need a hand sometimes. And so this is what I want to say, the importance of being together. And you can always count, and I'm saying this with sincerely, with my heart, saying that you can count on the Brazilian consulate for whatever need. I focus on trade, investment, and tourism, and business, but you can count on us also on a personal level to help everywhere you can. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Minister Sena. That was excellent. I really appreciate it, especially the message at the end. And the Brazilian American Chamber can also be a conduit to that. Before I pass the floor to Minister Marco Antonio Nakata, just wanted to say two things. First, we are recording this, and there'll be a link on the website if you want to redo it or share with other people. And second, if you have any questions, we're going to take all question and answers through the question and answer icon on the bottom of your screen. And we'll probably leave the question and answers till the end. So without further ado, we are honored to have with us also not only Minister Sena, but Minister Marco Antonio Nakata from the Brazilian Consulate here in New York.
Be here today. I would like to say a very short message from the Consulate General of Brazil, explaining what we have been doing lately regarding the assistance that we are doing for the Brazilian nationals. Since last 23rd, March 23rd, the Consulate has been working has been attending only the emergency cases. So we are not open to the public as we normally are. We have put 2 telephones, mobile telephones, to the community that are used 24 hours per day, and also an email for people that have emergency problems. What we consider emergency problems are cases of hospital, of problems with airplane tickets, and the necessity of passports that are for people who need to travel back to Brazil. We have in the last week helped 150 people as in this emergency situation that we have created in the consulate, and we have issued around 6 passports or documents for travel documents. Another thing which is important is that we are in these phone calls that we are with which we are assisting people. We support people indicating places that they might need in terms of shelters, in terms of psychological support, or any other matter that people might need. We help people from which is our jurisdiction, no? The states of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. We also created a channel of communication with 15 institutions, especially charity institutions and institutions that support Brazilian community, so that we can coordinate all the actions that we are doing regarding the support we are going to do to the Brazilian community. And another thing which is very important is that we are, when we receive phone calls from Brazilians, we also provide information regarding the protocol that people should follow regarding the COVID-19. Finally, I would like to say that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brazil created a crisis cabinet, which is responsible for coordinating all the actions in all the embassies and all the consulates of Brazilian consulates and embassies in the world, so that we can coordinate the return to Brazil of Brazilians that have had problems of finding flights back to Brazil. This coordination, this cabinet, is very important because it has already created and provided flights for Brazilians that couldn't go back to Brazil, especially in places where there were no flights. In the case of the United States, although many companies have interrupted their flights, have canceled their flights, there are some flights that are still available. So in the case of the United States, we are still able to provide flights and help people to reschedule their flights back to Brazil. But in some cases, the Brazilian government was able to do some organize some flights to people that were not able to go back to Brazil. So these are the main actions we are doing today. The important thing is that whoever needs assistance from the consulate, there are 2 phone numbers that are in our websites and in our social media that are answered 24 hours a day. And we are trying to help all the Brazilians that are in need in this very difficult situation. Thank you, John. And I can answer any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Nakata. Will you be able to stay on, or do you want to take your questions now? And if not, we can forward them to you. Okay, well, then we'll do the questions.
Yes, as you wish. You can ask the questions now if you want.
We'll do them at the end if that's okay. And is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So next we have Laura Rabinowitz, who has worked in works in every aspect of international trade as a lawyer, counseling domestic firms and multinationals. Her company put out a great piece on disruption in international trade, and we've gotten something since then. So we're really interested to hear what you have to say, Laura. Passing it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you so much, John, and welcome everyone. So as John mentioned, my focus is on imports globally. I work with global companies who source components and raw materials from multiple countries. They manufacture in multiple countries, and they import and export globally. So Needless to say, the pandemic has created enormous supply chain difficulties. Just at the beginning of March, the discussion was, disruption to supply chains. Can raw materials and components get to the factories? If a frequent scenario is Italian fabric that goes to factories in China to be sewn into apparel, and the concern was, was the Italian fabric going to be able to get there, and was the Chinese factory going to be able to be open? And then the Chinese factories all closed, and then the Italian factories all closed, and then as we know, it then went global from there. For Brazilians, the aircraft parts that are so crucial, where are those components coming from? The industrial machinery, where are the components that are manufactured? Where are the components for the industrial machinery coming from? So that industrial machinery and airline parts can continue to be manufactured in Brazil. So this is sort of, at the beginning of March, things have changed so quickly, but at the beginning of March, we were concerned with raw materials, components. We were reviewing supply chain agreements. What happens when orders aren't fulfilled? Who would take the loss if orders aren't fulfilled 100%? And then, very quickly, by the middle of March, the conversation shifted, once the US shut down and there were, global shutdowns, there were just massive cancellation of orders by buyers, whether wholesale or retail. US buyers, certainly, big box retailers and other buyers, wholesalers, are just canceling orders. I've also heard numerous instances where buyers are not paying for orders that are even already delivered under the current circumstances. And I've heard from wholesalers, anything that wasn't on the water, those orders are being canceled. In terms of global ports, clearly global shipping has been tremendously affected. In February, the two busiest ports in China were down by 21% in volume. Rotterdam was down 20%. For the busy US ports, Long Beach and LA, 10 and 23%, and those are February numbers. So certainly the March numbers will be different. For the first 2 weeks of March, the US imports from China decreased by 45%, which is like unheard of, clearly. In terms of air cargo, I've heard from companies importing into the US, they've had difficulty getting space sometimes, and costs have gone up quite considerably. And Peter will probably discuss that as well. In terms of US ports, there was a concern that they might be closed during the pandemic, but so far they are open and they seem to be functioning somewhat normally. The president alluded to, when he was in an Oval Office address, alluded to that he was, stopping people coming in from certain countries, and he alluded to the stoppage of goods as well, but the White House backtracked on that. So merchandise has been coming in through the ports. There also has not been an increase in detentions, which we thought there might be because of the virus, or from a US perspective, an increase in required documentation. Other countries have increased their documentation during the virus. For example, Greek imports of Italian cheese, Polish imports of Italian lettuce, and Ukrainian imports of Italian apples all require additional documentation. Now, from a US customs perspective, there's tremendous speculation right now that there could be an announcement of a delay in duty payments. We are really waiting on a customs announcement, and hopefully it will come soon. Similar to the announcement that payments to the IRS will be delayed by 90 days, there's speculation that the same will be true for US duty payments. It's been a tumultuous week just in terms of duty payments. On March 20th, Customs announced that they would be accepting requests on a case-by-case basis for a delay in duty payments. That was on a Friday. We filed some on Monday, got accepted right away. Tuesday, we filed more, never heard back. And then by Thursday, the government announced that they would not be accepting any more exclusion requests. And then on Friday, they said, just not accepting anymore, and it's very unclear whether they're going to act on the exclusion requests that have already come in. But I think this week, and there was a lot of conflicting reports over the weekend, and Monday we didn't hear anything. Hopefully we'll hear this week, but there should be an announcement soon on whether there will be a delay in duty payments, not a cancellation of duty payments, but just a delay similar to the IRS one. And I think the announcement that will come out will be that duty payments will be delayed for the general rate of duty, not for the special additional duties, the Section 301 duties on products of China, or the specific products from the EU that we also have duties on currently. And also any anti-dumping duties, and there are dumping orders on certain specific Brazilian products. So those, I think, will be in place as well, I think. But we are waiting on the announcement. Hopefully it will come soon. Another announcement from Customs last week on PPE, everyone is talking about the importance of PPE, is that Customs is telling the trade to alert Customs if you have a shipment of PPE coming into the US. They want them to just sail in and not get stopped by Customs. Certain medical care products also require FDA approval. So based on my experience this announcement just came last week, so just based on my experience in the last week or so, this has not worked 100%, but I think Customs is trying, and I have been working to try to get certain shipments of PPE released from Customs a little bit quicker, but hopefully that will improve as well. So the U.S. Trade Representative also announced with regard to PPE and other medical products that they'll be accepting requests for specific exclusions if those products are made in China and there are the additional duties. They're accepting exclusion requests for medical products so that they will not be subject to those additional duties from China. Even if those products had earlier been denied in this process. This process has been around since the duties went into effect on Chinese products in July of 2018. The additional duties range from 25% to the list that was released in September of 19 down to 7.5%. But the U.S. Trade Representative is accepting exclusion requests on medical care products, and they are releasing those exclusion requests, I would say with some rapidity, so that's quite a good thing. These requests are posted publicly. Interestingly, I saw a request for the manufacturer of the dispenser that Purell comes out, the plastic one that you can push. Those dispensers are manufactured in the United States, but a key component comes from China. The company a number of months ago had applied for an exclusion request. They were denied. As I said, these are posted publicly. Curious if they will request again. I'm fairly certain they will. And I think they will be accepted this time. Just wanted to mention that there are country-specific export controls on specific products. In particular, the European Union announced that there's special authorization needed for exports of PPE outside of the Union. So that's something for companies to keep in mind. And just, I find, interesting, I don't know is the right word, but this intersection of the pandemic and current U.S. trade policy, for somebody who's in the trade space, is interesting. And this administration has a view that the U.S. has a strategic vulnerability, and they have a continued goal of bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. and the importance of manufacturing masks and ventilators in the U.S. And the administration view, the question is, does the pandemic prove just that? So, sort of this is an open question right now. But this administration certainly has been very aggressive in its trade policy, imposing Section 301 tariffs on specific products on the EU. That stems from a long-going WTO dispute over illegal subsidies to Airbus. They've been very aggressive on that. And as I mentioned earlier, the tariffs on specific Chinese products, which basically cover all products coming from China. They've released additional these lists. There are 4 lists since July of 2018 on additional products, ranging from 25% down to 7.5%. So they've been very, very aggressive. And then in terms of steel and aluminum, the Trump administration is using Section 232 to add additional tariffs on steel and aluminum, and that's global, not just for a specific country. Brazil is the 13th largest trading partner with the United States, and currently there's quota on steel and aluminum imported, but in a December of 2019 announcement, President Trump announced that he would not be adding additional tariffs on Brazilian steel and aluminum. So that was a good thing. So, you know, it's just moving so fast. I gave a talk on March 10th. I was thinking about this, and there the focus was on raw materials. Could they get to the factories? What if manufacturers couldn't fulfill the orders? As I said, we were looking at supply chain agreements and Incoterms and who bears the liability. And it very quickly changed from the Chinese factory shutdowns to a global pandemic. I'm working with a number of companies who are transforming their factories to manufacture products that can combat the virus. One, for example, has been making plastic packaging in the cosmetics industry, and they've converted their factory to make plastic face shields for healthcare workers. And so now really, you know, in the trade space, the focus is on the urgent need to produce PPE and ventilators and get them imported and distributed, and the impact of those concerns on the global supply chain. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was fantastic. It's sort of amazing how we take for granted the gains from trade. We only see them right now. This is analogous to a massive trade war, apart from the human tragedy, which is horrible. When we look at trade, we haven't seen anything like this since the Smoot-Hawley tariff, and it's analogous to that. The collapse in international trade is incredible, and I hope when everything normalizes, maybe we rethink the idea of using Super 301 and all these things to have trade wars, because this is what you get in the extreme. Frederick Bastiat told us this years ago. Thank you very much. Now we're going to turn to Peter Hawkins, who is the founder and CEO of Mohawk in Canada. He is the one that does the logistics about imports, exports. There's a lot of things with Brazil, and he has a lot of stuff to tell us today in terms of how he and specific industries are dealing with the trade disruption. Peter?
Sure. Thank you so much, John. You know, it's such a difficult time, and everyone is trying to adapt, but Laura is 100% correct. We are moving on the fly all the time. And one of the things that I found was when we were booking air cargo last week, in one phone call, things went from $1.30 a kilo to $5.60 a kilo. That was one phone call. So when you have this unpredictability, it becomes very hard for everyone. So all we can do is deal with what's in front of us and try to just put one foot in front of us. So that's what we're trying to do here at Mellowhawk. So very quickly, Mellowhawk is a freight forwarding company. We have offices in Canada, the US, and Brazil. We're based out of Miami in the US, and that's been still a very busy office, and it's been a busy ocean office. We do air, ocean, and trucking. With Brazil, primarily the products that we see going to Brazil are heavy machinery for resource extraction, technology, some food products, because Canada is particularly eager to get food products into Brazil. Brazilians always turn up their nose when they see maple syrup, but we certainly move a lot of it. Going the other direction, we get a lot of technology from Brazil, and we get a lot of broadcasting equipment, and a lot of small pieces that are very, very valuable, that are the parts for fintech. Fintech is a hot industry for us, and we get a lot of fresh fruit, and even fresh sliced fruit. In the old days, and by old days I mean 60 days ago, in the old days there was a farm in Brazil that could actually pick mangoes, slice mangoes, package mangoes, and have them in the shelves in Canada, in our nice cold Canada, on the store shelves in 72 hours. Unbelievable that all of that has collapsed. So what we are finding is that there is, and this is kind of anecdotally from our partners in Brazil as well too, because we also deal with 20 other agents in Brazil, that for containers, there's a shortage of equipment. There's a shortage of containers, mainly because of a huge pile stuck in China. And a lot of the passenger flights that have been canceled, we previously carried a great deal of cargo. And with those flights canceled, we're now looking at freighter flights. But freighter flights have minimum charges, and it's a real eye-opening experience for a shipper who previously had a great rate on a passenger flight, now to have a minimum charge on a freighter. Backlog on freighters, space on freighters, all the things that Laura touched on are 100% true. But what we do is we pay attention to just who is still doing it and how they're still doing it. In fact, for Canada, we are trucking across the states down to Miami and putting them on flights from Miami. Across America, we're getting a lot of trucking that's happening, but we're also we're getting a lot of feedback that truckers have no place to stop. They, you know, restaurants that they normally would go to are actually closing or only doing takeout, and bathrooms aren't available. So we have seen all kinds of problems that we didn't anticipate. I didn't realize how base things would get, how quickly they would get to be dealing with these small issues. Right now, so by air, we're shipping into Viracopos, into Campinas, and again, it's a smaller airport. It's more difficult to get things around in Brazil. And also the planes flying out of there domestically, of course, are smaller, so cargo has to be smaller. Trucking lines aren't as efficient, and there's some issues there. It isn't as bad as it's going to be. I will tell you that right now. Things are still moving, but I do anticipate things being deteriorating. And so I want people to be aware of that, because ultimately we will get through it. But we're all at various stages. In Canada, for instance, we've had lockdown now for more than 2 weeks. People working from home, people self-isolating, and while things are still rising, we're anticipating the peak to be relatively soon. In the United States, things are very different, and we see what's happening there. My hope is that the self-isolating process that people do there, they act on quickly. The same in Brazil. People I talked to, I saw those wonderful pictures of Ipanema. Man, empty, 4:30 on a Saturday. So that is good news. So if you are bored at home, that's a good thing. I want to say that. Back to the matter at hand, though. We have discovered anecdotally that there, and I believe this is actually the truth too, that COVID-related goods being exported from Brazil now require a new permit. A new export license on top of the usual licenses. And part of that, I think, is because Brazil has been very generous providing goods and PPE goods for people around the world. But now they want to make sure that they have enough for themselves. And so there's a relation there that we have to pay attention to. The Brazilian government wants to make sure there's not a greater shortage. Ocean cargo that we have going to Brazil, that is going into Santos and Victoria and Itajaí, are all fine. Customs are happening normally. Things are booked and moving quickly. What we do find is just things are slower. And that's something that everybody has to be aware of. But right now, stuff is moving. Into Canada, it's a different story. Because so many people are at home, things are stockpiling on factory docks. And so that has been an issue here. And I'm seeing some of that is starting to happen a little bit in the United States as well. What else can I tell you? One of the things that we do that I think Laura does as well is in trying to consult with companies about what they can do, we're trying to encourage as many companies as possible who are in the middle of wait and see to actually take this time to do some homework. And part of that is really improving the marketing for when time, because times will change. This is going to pass. And since it's going to pass, I really want people to pay attention to the opportunities that will come forward, because there are always opportunities after there are obstacles. And so I want people to start paying attention to their marketing, their materials, make sure they're perfect and they're sending the right message. Make sure that they are still maintaining their networks online. I'm using LinkedIn like crazy to make sure that everybody still knows who we are. We have not laid off anybody, so we're still in business, and as a result, I want to make sure that we stuck it out and people know that we stuck it out. I want people to understand that all those trade accelerator programs, all those trade promotion programs are still valid. That material is still valid, the information is still valid, and what is going to happen after all of this is still valid. People will still want things, they still need to move, they still need to be manufactured. There is potential for growth and hope after all of this. That's all for my comments.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was excellent. Now we're going to turn the microphone over to Lucio Feijó Lopes, whose firm, Feijó Lopes Advogados, does a lot in international trade, but also investment. And I think the things I've received from him, his daily newsletters, et cetera, really focus on the investment part, but I'll let him describe that to you. Lucio, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, John. Thank you, the other panelists. Fantastic. Thanks for everyone who's now joining this webinar. I think the entire world now had a hard stop in like end of February, beginning of March, after we had this, since Brazil started coming back from this big downturn starting like 2015 until 2019, the expectations for trade and investments were really high, and the U.S. and China are those two big partners of Brazil, and not only in trade but in investments. And so these two countries are now being suffering by big sufferers of the coronavirus novel, and it impacts trade and investments. For example, China is the biggest business, a trade partner of Brazil, with $65 billion US in 2019. US was 29 billion in 2019. So this trade partnership with China and US, like focusing on US, creates a lot of opportunities and a channel of trade and investments. And not only investment in equity, but investments in lending, banking. So we have this big relationship with the US, not only with the US, but with China, for example, and in Europe, and with like banks and funds and investors lending to Brazilian companies, or investing in equity in Brazilian companies, or setting up their business locally here in Brazil. So with all this this big effect of the coronavirus, it's had a really hard stop, and now it's going to start creating this negative effect that we're going to have to walk through within the next 1, 2, 3, 4 months from now. So that's what we are seeing. Like we started the year with like big expectations in the trade, in the financial markets, in the capital markets, in the with massive investments from foreigners in Brazil, like the direct investments and loan investments. And now we are just like Laura, who is a lawyer with me, we now just stuck in looking at papers here, just to see what will be the effect. So just things that we thought would be left to the past was like the Brazilian judicial recovery. That is the version of the U.S. Chapter 11 from 2015 to 2018, year by year, increased 35 on average % year by year until 2018, and then it started reducing a curve in a downturn as the economy would be more stabilized. But now, unfortunately, what you're going to see not only with Brazil, but also with the other countries, is going to be a massive number of of restructurings and maybe Chapter 11 as companies over the past 3 or 4 years, they suffered in their working capital. They were very highly leveraged companies. So now this are the point that we are now as Brazilian legal counsel, devoting time to see what happens with this business arrangements from a trade standpoint, with this supply contract that Laura just mentioned, the cargo contract that Peter mentioned, but also like loan agreements, like export prepayments. U.S. lenders and European lenders or Chinese lenders, they lend tens of billions of dollars to finance Brazilian exports. So this money is now sitting here, and not only with per export, but with direct lending, and also with from an equity standpoint, like companies or funds investing into equity of Brazilian companies. So now, what happens next? What should we do? In our experience, going back to the crisis of 2008, 2009, and then 2015 on, is that you have a group of investors or lenders or business partners that they have so many problems in their domestic market that they stop taking a look at what happens, for example, in Brazil. But you should do the opposite. But this type of foreign investors or lenders who just they do not pay attention to what is happening here are the ones that will be be the last one in line to renegotiate better terms or renegotiate maybe collateral new restructuring terms. So the experience show that the community of investments and trade that have a relationship with Brazil, they should be active now. They should do what we call like a four-step, that the piece that I sent to John that we talked last week was like, you need to do like point one, like a risk assessment, what you have in hands, like how your trade partner in Brazil, your borrower, your guarantor, your invested company is suffering under this coronavirus. For example, the agribusiness companies are the ones that are not suffering that much at this point, but there might be a suffering at some point, but not now. So the Brazilian government seems to be facilitating the flow of foods or even the export of foods, as Brazilian is a big exporter. But so you need to take a look at of what's happening with your business partner or borrower in Brazil to see what's going to happen next. That's and take a look at the legal documentation that you have, and to see if there is force majeure works in that case, and somebody will send you a notification saying, okay, I cannot pay you, or I cannot export you this type of goods because of force majeure clause. You need to understand what terms and conditions you are subject in your case. Second thing is take a look at in terms of lenders at collateral. Not meaning that we are thinking about like massive enforcements of collateral. No, it's more of, okay, we are in hardish times. And so you need to at least be in contact with the Brazilian companies if you are a lender, and say, okay, can we enhance our collateral position so we can postpone the payment for X, Y, and Z times? That's going to be a scenario, a case that we're going to see multiple times throughout the year. So understanding what your collateral position, what your documentation position is very important. Third is brainstorming. Brazil is a complex country in terms of the various risks that involve and opportunities that involve doing business here locally. So we saw during the 2008-2009 crisis and the downturn after 2015 is that when foreigners, they put together into the companies, the lenders or the insurers, a group of brainstorming composed of commercial relationship officers, backup officers, and lawyers, accountants, to understand what they should do now and in the coming months, like 1 month, 2 months after month, is a successful recipe for mitigating risks or having a whole contact with your Brazilian partner here. And the fourth point is restructuring. We're going to see a number of restructurings in the trade side for long-term contracts. That's going to happen, long-term supply contracts. Things are changing. Restructurings of investments, equity investments, like companies or funds that have already invested a portion of their commitments, but are yet to put additional funds. So there might be some restructuring at this point. And lenders, a number of large and mid-sized U.S. banks or funds will be involved in restructuring. So you need to understand what type of documentation should be in place in order for you to to be a partner, be close to your Brazilian counterpart, but protect you on the legal standpoint and commercial standpoint. So these are some of the topics, John, that I thought would be important to start discussing. So I hand the word to you.
Thank you very much, Lucio. Excellent as well. Really, thank you all to all the panelists for really great expositions. Please, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A chat on the bottom of your screen. We'll have some interaction between the panelists as well. But we do already have a couple questions from the audience. The first one goes to Ministers Sena and Nakata. What are the current restrictions, protocols for U.S. citizens to visit Brazil, and how long do we expect them to be in place? Mr. Nakata, you have to unmute. You couldn't hear me, huh? Fernando, could you hear me?
Yeah, can you?
Yeah, now we hear you. We got you.
Can you repeat, please?
The question is, what are the current restrictions or protocols for U.S. citizens to visit Brazil, and how long do we expect them to stay in place?
Yeah, the last restrictions are that for 1 month, any foreigners are not able to visit Brazil. As far as we know, at least we have the protocol is 1 month. We don't know what's going to happen after that, but for the moment, for 1 month, only Brazilians or foreigners that have a close relationship with the Brazilian, like husbands, wives, and can go to Brazil. Otherwise, they are not allowed to go to Brazil.
Very good. Thank you very much. The second question is to all the panelists, if they have an opinion. What are the panelists' views on a timeline for the negotiation of free trade agreement between the U.S. and Brazil in light of the COVID-19 pandemic? Maybe you can start with Laura, I think, maybe.
Okay, I'm unmuted. The USTR I actually find it interesting that during the pandemic, the USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative, is still talking about free trade agreements that the United States wants to explore. Brazil has not been mentioned recently. Kenya, Japan, other ones, but Brazil has not been mentioned.
So I'll add my own add-on question to that. Is there any sense in your dealings with Washington that, I mean, it seems like they're desperate to reopen imports especially, so maybe this export good, import bad mentality might change. But is there any push to move back to multilateralism at all? I mean, there's quite a bit of coordination on the virus itself, but I just wondered if there was something on trade, some moving back.
Right. I think from this administration, I would have to say no. They really like bilateral agreements, not multilateral.
John, if I can, sorry, if I just can add, I think just before maybe the ministers can add the information, but throughout 2019, there was a push by the Brazilian government and the U.S. government for a bilateral trade agreement. That I think that's conversation. It came to the press, and then I think it went through restricted people in both governments. So I think at this point there might be talkings, but we don't see them in the press anymore. But we had some news back in 2019 that stopped after mid of the year.
Thank you very much. The next question is, can the panel...
Sorry, can I just add something, John?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
No, I mean, of course, this topic is not handled by the Brazilian Consulate General here in New York. It's something that, of course, in our embassy in Washington would be more, more, I mean, they are the ones that would be able to respond in a more technical manner. So I won't go too much into details of that because I don't want to give wrong information, but just wanted to remind of the conclusions of the visit of Brazilian President Bolsonaro to Mar-a-Lago and the talks with President Trump at that point, where this issue about the importance of trade was very much highlighted, and also were highlighted during we have a new ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Brazil. And I think the issue of trade and the facilitation and agreements were discussed also through the diplomatic channels. So I just want to remind of a visit a few weeks ago. It looks like a long time ago, but President Bolsonaro was recently in Florida, and they had a discussion. So you could also, of course, see the results of this visit and the declaration that followed that visit. I think is a good suggestion to look into that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that comes next. Thank you very much, Minister Sena. Next question. Can the panelists offer any insight into how agricultural trade out of Brazil is being impacted by the pandemic?
I'm going to take that, John. From what I've seen, it's been impacted absolutely, and it's been much more of a container situation than anything else. Having the right equipment ready to ship out things, especially frozen foods, and that's been a really difficult situation just because we don't have enough containers. Coffee is still moving, which is apparently coffee never dies, and I think a lot of the green agri-tech stuff is going back and forth because this is spring season and here in the north, and so I find a lot of people are still trying to ship that kind of stuff as well. What our real problem is, of course, is there isn't equipment, there isn't flights, there isn't routes. So people should be looking for new markets right now as well. The only problem is, of course, who can pay. So you're right to say that the agricultural side of things hasn't been impacted the way so many other industries have, but ultimately the marketplace doesn't seem to have the cash to pay, and so this hold that we have going on this right across the two continents is really substantial, and I'm hopeful that things will start moving quickly in a much more orderly way, but we need to have the means to move things.
John, I may add just a few words, because just yesterday I was talking to a few head of Brazilian major agribusiness associations, and what they're saying is that the just like in line with what Peter said, maybe there might be some side impacts, adverse impacts on the agribusiness, but this being a sector that's been free to export, and they have been doing. There's not only with soft commodities, with hard commodities, and also with meat in general. So that's the general understanding of the head of major associations in Brazil.
Agriculture is one of the sectors that's been hit differently in a number of countries before all this happened, of course, because of the retaliation by the Chinese on soybeans, et cetera. That helped Brazil to have a over 300% increase in exports to China, but prices fell. So the revenue part didn't really help that much. And certainly US farmers have been hit by this, and more complications come from this pandemic for sure. I just, my own sort of question I have for the panelists is like, have you seen, I mean, there was an original shock. Have you seen, I know, Peter, you addressed this a little bit, but some kind of relief, you've seen people reacting to what's going on. Have you seen any recovery? Certainly, Laura went through some amazing numbers in terms of cancellations, and maybe we have some defaults on not paying for orders. But have you seen any part of the other side of this? Are we getting to there yet, or are we still on the downside?
Here's kind of a remarkable thing. All the companies that were suffering before, and really because of currency problems, they were slow payers before, and they're slow payers today. All the ones that can manage their finances and have managed their finances are still paying. And so I take my hat off to the companies that have prepared for some kind of rainy day, because at least those ones are still keeping the business flowing and keeping the bills paid. So, and as a result, in our company, we haven't laid off anybody. We have not cut salaries. We have, I think 90% of the people are working from home. There are five at the office here in Toronto. In Miami, everybody's working from home, but we have a warehouse operator who is receiving cargo there. And so in terms of just who has planned well for it, it's really demonstrating now their success. Something else I just want to stick in, and now it's off topic, John, but in Canada, we've had a couple of changes that I think some of your watchers might appreciate. We have a new announcement last week on Wednesday that the government would give a 10% break on salaries. I applied for that on Thursday, and I got it on Friday. This week, they've announced a 75% subsidy. It's something that we will not be paying back. Now, of course, as a Canadian, we're much more used to public-private combinations and combinations of capitalism and socialism, but we have a 75% incentive that I have applied for, and I do anticipate getting it for my next payroll, and that will be retroactive to March 15th. So rather than having all these people collecting unemployment, they are in fact subsidizing salaries in place. And I think that's a very interesting exercise that has worked remarkably smoothly. Why? Because there is an honor system here, and people are just applying for it, and the paperwork will come afterwards, and there will be a mess later, I'm sure. In Brazil, when I'm talking to my clients there, everyone's working from home. People are still getting paid. People are still managing their finances. And as I said before, those who did a good job are still doing a good job. Those who perhaps were more vulnerable are still more vulnerable.
Here, it's a little different. It may come out to be essentially the same thing when things are implemented, but you have two things going on. One, the furloughing. If they're allowing people to be furloughed, you don't lose your job, but you're home, and you will get a subsidy from the government that way in the form of unemployment. And then also we have the small business loans. They've authorized a huge amount of money for small business loans that if you use that to keep people employed, they'll be forgiven. At least that's my understanding of it. I haven't seen the full text of what was proposed that already passed into law. But it's a similar thing, but it's not a, it seems much more clear. 75% is a little bit more clear than and we'll see how the bureaucracy does with all the implementation. Laura, do you have something on this, or? Sorry about that. I thought you were going to say something. Anyway, we have gotten no more questions. Do any of the panelists have questions for the other panelists before we close this out? I think this has been a fabulous session. Well, with that, I'm going to thank you very much. The replay will be on the website shortly, and really great panel to all of you. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for joining. We're on the call, and we'll see you on our next one. We have another webinar on Thursday, and please look in your inbox for the announcement. Thank you very much. Excuse me, on Thursday at 10 o'clock the same time. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank
Be
you,
well.
John.
Thank you very much.
Good luck,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.